All right, good evening, everybody. My name is Neil Chase. I'm the CEO at CalMatters. Really happy to host this event with our great friends at Fresnoland, including Fresnoland's leader, Donnie Bergstrom, is up here on the stage. You're going to meet in just a minute. Big cheer for Fresnoland. CalMatters is the nonprofit news organization covering state policy and politics. We're based in Sacramento. We work all over the state. Fresnoland is based here in Fresno, covering local issues in Fresno, things that are really important to the community and the metro area. And the magic in this is when all of these newer nonprofit news organizations work together and cooperate to share stories, to share information, to boost each other, and to help each other raise funds to support our important nonprofit missions. We're gathered here tonight to talk about the issue that is so important to so many people across the state, housing. And we have an incredible panel for you to dig into that. We're going to have a conversation on stage. We're going to, with about 15 or 20 minutes left in the session, open it up to questions and see how much of this the really deep issue we can get into. We could probably do this like as a 6-hour panel, but we're going to keep it to an hour, respect everybody's time. So I'm going to turn it over to CalMatters housing reporter Ben Christopher and let him take it from there.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you. And welcome, everyone. Thanks for coming. I think if you've come out here on a Thursday evening to talk about housing policy, it's probably not going to surprise any of you that California is a very expensive place to live. The cost of living is reliably a top concern in poll after poll. It's renters up and down the state are squeezed as they're shut out of an increasingly stratospheric housing market. And the cost of housing is the main reason we continue to face what often seems like an intractable homelessness crisis. It's the main reason our state's population has declined for the first time year over year in 2020, and then again in 2021, and then again in 2022. It's a massive driver of economic inequality. So none of this is news, I hope, to anyone here. And in fact, if you ask anyone in the country, California at this point has almost become, I think, a synonym with sky-high housing costs as much as sunny beaches and tech and Hollywood. But that conversation at the national level, and even sometimes at the state level in Sacramento, it's focused on a particular version of the state's housing crisis, one that you'll find in Los Angeles and San Francisco and San Diego, but Fresno, where some of those affordability concerns are just as acute, if not more, the problem sometimes looks a little different, and I think sometimes so do the solutions. And so to talk about that, we have 5 expert panelists here. I'm going to keep the introductions short because we have to solve the regional housing crisis in an hour, and I want to leave at least 15 minutes for a Q&A. But please welcome Danielle Bergstrom, founder and executive director of Fresnoland. Elliott Balch, president of the Downtown Fresno Partnership. Michael Duarte, chief real estate officer at the Fresno Housing Authority. Alex Alvarado, lead housing organizer for Faith in the Valley. And then Ana Velazquez, who's both the district director for State Senator Ana Caballero, whose district includes much of Fresno, including, are we in district right now? Yeah, all right, including where we are sitting. And also happens to be the mayor of Soledad as well. So welcome, Mayor. Yeah. So I wanted to start with just a sort of framing, how did we get here kind of question. Fresno and I think the Valley in general has often been seen as a bastion of relative affordability in California for a long time, but that really started to change, particularly with the pandemic. So since June 2020, just a stat to motivate this, the average rent in the Fresno metro area has gone up 35%. The average home price over the same period also up 35%. Those are bigger relative spikes than you saw in Los Angeles, San Francisco, Sacramento. So if ever there was a time when Fresno was shielded from the California housing crisis, that time is definitely over. So Danielle, really simple question. What happened?
Okay.
You have 90 seconds.
Great. There wasn't a time too long ago where if you were in Fresno and you said that there might be an issue called gentrification or displacement or unaffordability, that you would be laughed out of a lot of rooms. And I think 2020 really changed that. And here's the complex array of things that I think, in my observation as a journalist, as a researcher, as a policy person, that I've seen. We saw a huge influx of remote workers coming to buy homes in the Fresno region, in Madera, in Tulare County. We have a lot of our rental housing stock in Fresno are single family homes. A much larger proportion of our rental housing stock in Fresno are single family homes. And a lot of those homes flipped to ownership when people were trying to buy houses during the pandemic and there was very low supply. Not a lot of people were building during the pandemic. And so a lot of owners who had rentals saw a great opportunity to flip. We did a little bit of reporting on that. And you have a large working class population in Fresno that could, during the pandemic, when wages were depressed, when people were out of work, when you had higher unemployment, they could not handle those shocks. And it created a really bottled up ecosystem of unaffordability really fast.
Okay. And Alex, I mean, you're a community organizer. You are working directly with renters, people who are often facing a lot of economic precarity, people who are facing eviction, possibly homelessness. So what has this run up in rents and perhaps home prices, what has that meant for the people that you're working with?
Is this on? Yes. Yeah. I wasn't sure how to turn it on, so I was hoping someone did it for me.
You're good.
It's been really difficult. It's been extremely difficult. I think every day there's a wonderful amount of faces in here, organizers, people who are on the ground today, and I think they would agree how difficult it is talking to folks and hearing their stories and what's happening, because it isn't just their rents are increasing, it's that their car is broken down. It's that the air conditioner is not working and no one's listening to them. It's an array of stuff that is just piling and piling on each other. And I think something we don't pay enough attention to is the grunt of the housing crisis, the economic crisis, the environmental justice crisis falls on the people who've been historically ignored, who've been put in this place due to historic policies and decisions and disinvestments. And there's a lot that they're carrying. Also, because of these wonderful faces out in the crowd, they're finding hope. They're finding energy to fight back. They're finding ways to be creative along with their neighbors to show up for each other. And it's beautiful and heart-wrenching to see and to be a part of.
Yeah. So I want to talk about the role that state policy plays in this. A lot of the most high-profile legislators in Sacramento who are most vocal and active in the housing area, they often come from coastal big cities. Scott Wiener, Buffy Wicks, these are the two chairs of the housing committees in both chambers, respectively. They're both from the Bay Area. But Ana, you work for Senator Caballero, who I think stands out in some ways as a legislator who is both very involved in shaping housing policy at the state level, but also comes from this region or represents this region. So I wonder, can you talk a little bit about how the specific concerns of this region are reflected in some of the policies that she's been pushing?
Yeah, thank you, Ben, and thank you for the invitation to be here. So as you mentioned, I think I want to share just a little bit of history about Senator Caballero to be able to understand why she's such a champion as well for affordable housing. So her background, obviously, she was an attorney, worked with CRLA predominantly with our farm worker population and underserved communities, and specifically in the Salinas Valley. So she's understood for a long time some of the social inequities that have existed, social and economic inequities with these specific populations. She understands the disparities. And although she was working predominantly in the labor workforce, a lot of the social inequalities included housing. And then also her background as a planning commissioner when she was in the city of Salinas gave her a lot of information also to be able to understand the importance of land use, especially for our local communities. Then her experience being a mayor for the city of Salinas obviously provided her with another opportunity to be able to really understand Local control, I know for a lot of the cities is really critical in terms of how do we move forward with housing policies that are equitable, and how do they still make sure that there's local control. So having I think all of that background really puts her in a position where she's able to bring forth these policies, specifically in terms of housing. How do we really, she's always been centered on housing first. How do we ensure that our underserved communities have access to affordable housing, access to creation of generational wealth? And I think that's something that I've seen discussed in this realm in the past, and streamlining the existing policies to allow for affordable housing to be created in a more expeditious manner. And so with that, I know the introduction of some of her bills. So I don't know if you want me to talk about that now, but I think I want to just paint that perspective, because I think we have a really unique senator that really understands not only at the state level the policies, but comes from local, so understands the needs, especially in our underserved communities.
Well, you mentioned the word streamlining, which is interesting, because I think when you look at the big housing debates that have been playing out in Sacramento, a lot of them have been of a piece where it is the focus is on removing some of the barriers that are in the way to development of housing development of any kind. So whether that's zoning restrictions, whether that is impact fees, whether that is litigation through environmental litigation, and I think that is in some ways predicated on the idea that there are developers who are clawing over themselves to getting ready to just sink their teeth into a downtown, and those restrictions are in place to keep them back. Elliott, I know you're focused on development in downtown Fresno. I think what I just described maybe is very true in San Francisco, LA, San Diego. What about Fresno? What's the limiting factor here?
Well, I think you're onto something, which is that for housing to be produced anywhere, it's the product of all the right pieces coming together. And so the ingredients are things like, do you have the developer? Do you have the land that's available? Is the infrastructure in place? Is the enabling regulatory policy there? Is there support, or at least not opposition, from the community that can derail a project? And financing, right? So these are some of the ingredients that when they're all there, you can get housing projects developed. And when things are missing, you don't. And the things that can go missing can vary by the area, right? So like you mentioned, in the Bay Area, lots of community opposition. With our downtown, we've had infrastructure challenges. We've had financing challenges where lenders are reluctant to lend for infill housing. Over time, like you started by noting the spike in housing prices in the recent couple of years, which kind of calls to question, well, how did we keep them low for so long? And we've had a lot of housing production over a long period of time by growing out and out and out. We've had the ingredients in place for housing development on the fringe of the city. And so I think the point where we're at now is, do we want to make sure all of those ingredients are in place for downtown? If they're not, then we know from the past the kinds of patterns that we're going to repeat.
And what would you say is what are the missing ingredients in Fresno?
There's a number. So I think that you highlighted, do we have developers? We certainly do have developers who have projects. They're actually at City Hall right now in plan review, who are proposing, particular projects. There could be many more, and there's certainly many more opportunities. We have 125-year-old infrastructure in some cases, some of our sewer pipes. So if you imagine the J.C. Penney building, a 140,000 square foot department store that had maybe 2 bathrooms historically, now becoming 140 apartment units with 140 toilets and 140 kitchen sinks and showers. It means a different sewer capacity, and especially when that sewer line is 125 years old. So just as an example of the needs that we have in order to see that occur.
And Michael, I kind of want to turn to the question of affordable housing specifically. And by the way, for folks who don't know, if when I say affordable, I'm not just talking about cheap housing. I'm talking about housing that is deed restricted, set aside specifically and explicitly for people making under a certain income. So we were talking earlier, Michael, and you mentioned that there's an imbalance between what Fresno housing is able to provide and sort of what the demand or what the need is. And I'd imagine that has been widened, that gap has widened over the last few years as rents have gone up. Can you speak to
Yeah,
that?
absolutely. So there's different levels of how we can answer the question, right? I was looking at some data from the California Housing Partnership they had available. I looked at the report they put out in terms of housing demand and around affordability in 2018. They just put one out in May of 2023, so it's available on their website. But it actually shows that the demand has been pretty consistent. I think the need for affordable housing is in the spotlight right now and getting a lot more attention, but the need in Fresno is been there pretty consistently. In terms of affordability, there's a need of over 36,000 affordable units, and that's defined as households paying more than 30% of their income towards housing. Particularly those that are extremely low are paying upwards of 73% of their income towards housing.
73.
And so the ability to buy groceries and health, I mean, there's sacrifices being made. And so that's a severe problem. In terms of demand, I'll give you a couple real life examples. In 2021, we opened up our Soledad Commons development in Clovis, and it's 60 fantastic brand new units. We had over 10,000 applications in Clovis. We just opened up the Monarch earlier this year, and there's 57 units there in Chinatown, and we received over 4,000 applications in 2 weeks. This week, if you're not aware, the Housing Authority opened up the Section 8 wait list, so please help spread the word so that folks are able to apply. We are going to be open for a month. I think today was opening day. We have over 10,000 or close to 10,000 applications just in day one.
Wow.
So to give you a sense of the real need out there, it's tremendous.
And I just asked Elliott about sort of what's the limiting factor, what's keeping back the housing on the private side, and on the affordable side, what is the limiting factor?
In terms of more production, I think there's not one big thing. There's you could do streamlined bills for land use. That's helpful. Working with the city and making sure that they're able to process applications for permits or entitlements quickly. I think that's important. You need our utility companies to plug us in when we're ready to go. So all of these things are important, but I think at the end of the day, it boils down to financing.
Money.
That's kind of the big thing. There's constantly we receive calls from developers saying they have the perfect site, they have the design ready to go, but they're looking for financing, right? I think that's what we're all looking for as developers, and there's just not enough of it. I think the state's been doing a great job. City of Fresno and other communities are doing what they can, but we need something different to really scale up.
Money. Yeah. And Alex, I know you and a lot of the folks in your coalition have been pushing for sort of different models. We've been talking about sort of the private sector housing. We talked about affordable housing. You've been looking at sort of different models of ownership. Can you talk about those efforts?
Yeah, I think the conversation around like capacity of housing is really important. The conversation around affordability and more affordable housing is really, really important. And I think the pieces that are missing from there, and also the policy and how it influences what we get to do on the development level, I think what's missing there is the long-term, like real ways we get to do housing, taking it off of the private market, putting it in the hands of the people, where housing is no longer a commodity. It's a basic human right. And what's really wonderful is that there are cities and countries taking these steps to redefine what housing is in their country. What does it mean to really take care of your community? What does it mean when every person, regardless of their race, income, sexual orientation, background, can have access to safe, affordable, accessible, and permanently affordable housing? I think when we can really sit together like this and have these conversations, I think we can start to look to what other cities and countries are doing, and also look into what historic practices have got us to where we are today, and to think of something different.
And Anna, just to stay on the affordable housing conversation a little bit longer, I mean, I know I hate to ask this because anyone who's following the budget process in Sacramento knows this is a tough year as legislators and the governor try to bridge a very large deficit. What can you tell us about affordable housing funding and other policy tools, if not funding, that might be forthcoming from the state?
Yeah, so Ben, before I get into some of the housing funding that is, on the table today, and hopefully the governor votes on it and passes the bill, I want to go back to something that Elliott and Michael brought up, and this is in terms of some of the streamlining policies, if I could do that, because I just want to mention, and in 2022, the senator did author SB 6, which is the Neighborhood Homes Act. And to the discussion about streamlining the approval process to be able to build more affordable and market rate homes, especially in different, currently areas where they're zoned commercial or retail. So a lot of what we're seeing and what was discussed earlier was a lot of the big box stores, right? After the pandemic, we realized that people really changed their shopping habits, and a lot of that was online, and for a lot of other financial reasons, as well as a lot of these big box stores are closing down, and most of those are happening within our downtown areas, and Fresno is in some of those same predicaments. So the senator's bill would really allow for the streamlining process to be able to ensure that there's opportunities to repurpose and relook at these downtowns that we have, to really make them, to your point, to that they're places where people can live, work, and play, right? We say that a lot. So now it's a time to really be able to look at how are we really developing our communities? How do we now redevelop, what used to be our downtown areas that really are allowing for people to live downtown, for people to work downtown, and for people to be able to play downtown, with the concept also of making sure that, I know I heard Danielle talk about gentrification, and I think a lot of that we've heard in different communities as well. And I know it's happening, it's happening throughout, but we want to make sure that now we have the opportunity, as we're looking at some of the policies that are being authored, such as SB 6, is how do we really reinvent our downtowns, and to really make sure that housing is at the center of it, and that we are working at the state level and at the local level to ensure that we're repurposing to be able to house the people that live in our communities.
Yeah. Well, actually, on the top, sorry, did you want to jump in?
I was just going to say, and Elliott can speak a lot better up to this than I can, but on the issue of streamlining, Fresno has been at the forefront of a lot of communities in California when it comes to streamlining zoning, and we've had by right zoning in downtown for most housing projects for 6 years, 7 years. And how has that worked?
Well, with a lot of zone capacity, 75,000 units could be built downtown under the zoning. Well, you heard me mention the JCPenney building, that it's in plan check. You may have noticed, well, what about the discretionary review hearing? Which there wasn't one, because the zoning that we have says if you want to do housing in a building like that, it's by right. And so you go straight to let's develop a developable project. Kind of unheard of in the Bay Area.
Well, I was going to say, this is kind of blowing my mind as someone who lives in the Bay Area.
Have you ever seen a project get blown up through CEQA, a housing project? Have you, Michael?
None that I've worked on, no.
So again, so on the topic of sort of revitalizing downtown and money coming from the state, I know I had a question here about the governor's proposed $250 million earmarked for infrastructure upgrades. And I know anyone who's been reading Fresnoland or CalMatters, is Nicole here? Yeah. So we've covered this. But I just understand today that maybe the Senate and the Assembly's budget proposal knocked that down to $50 million. In any case, Elliott, you've described that as an important investment in sort of the revitalization of downtown. Can you talk about what that would actually mean? And I understand that a lot of this funding is for things like parking lots and sidewalks. So how do we get from parking lots and sidewalks to a livable downtown with apartments that the average person can afford?
Well, what you may not know is when you are building housing, there's a whole range of things that have to happen, obviously, to build the housing on site, but then also off site. There are costs that happen. Like, again, going back to the Penny's building, if you build those apartments in the building, that's one thing, but then the sewer line runs, from the building off site. And so things like sewer, water, flood control at times, and just street fixing up that can be placed on a project, burdened on a project, when a project comes in, those are costs that get added to the cost of development. And so those things have to be done for the housing to be built. And really, it's just a question of where you want the dollars to come from to do those things. If you want it to be loaded on the building and the rents, or if you want it to be taken care of in a separate way.
Yeah.
The parking question is really one of, when you look downtown at the housing that we've had, and thank goodness we have 600 or so units that we've got downtown, but many of them, most of the land is surface parking. They're 2 or 3 stories as a result. They're sort of limited by that. And as we go forward, we want to make sure that downtown is maximally walkable and compact. And so we need to make sure that we don't have a bunch of surface parking, which is kind of the default, easiest, cheapest thing. If we don't want to see that, there's going to have to be some infrastructure built to make things more compact.
So actually on the subject of a denser downtown, we actually got a question submitted from a reader online. This is from Julie L. How is Fresno encouraging the development of housing on unused vacant parcels downtown? Elliott, do you have any thoughts on that? Or
what was the question? How is the city?
How is Fresno encouraging the development of housing on unused vacant parcels?
Well, I think it's all of these things, right? So back to the conversation about making sure all the ingredients are in place. We've got the streamlined zoning. There are some infrastructure issues. We have a supportive downtown environment. I would tell you that our conversations with small business owners and residents and workers and visitors is all very positive about seeing more downtown housing. Our small business owners in particular want to see more customers nearby. So that's what it is. It's all of those ingredients.
Danielle, it occurs to me, like, as we talk about this push for a denser Fresno, we're running into conflict with decades of the pattern of development, which has been that when both in Fresno and I'd say probably throughout the valley, which is that when there's more housing stock added, it tends to go outward, not up. And so I wonder, is this, as we talk about building housing to address the shortage, is this an opportunity to kind of rethink that development pattern, particularly in the context of things like climate change, drought that is certainly going to return, air quality?
I would like to think that it's an opportunity to rethink it. And I think that suburban sprawl is very deeply entrenched in our political economy in the Central Valley. It's the cog that makes a lot of the political machine move in some ways. And it's also a product of Proposition 13 and the way that local governments commodify and raise money for themselves. We don't have to go into Prop 13 deeper, but I had to make a shout out.
Yeah, we have 6 hours, right?
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
And that being said, the cost of sprawl continues to go up. We in Fresno have a pretty well-established freeway system, thank you in part to Measure C that has built our very robust freeway system that serves a lot of the sprawl. But there's still other major infrastructure challenges in the outlying areas of the city. Roads have to be widened, sewer trunks have to be built, new water supplies have to be built. They're seeing those struggles in Madera County right now, in southern Madera County, where water continues to be a main challenge for both the newer developments and older developments. So I think those will eventually throw hurdles, but in terms of the state stepping in a major way because of climate to stem suburban sprawl, I don't see that happening in the near future.
Okay. And Alex, when you hear about this conversation about a revitalized downtown, a denser downtown, much more housing construction, how optimistic are you that that is going to perhaps reverse some of the patterns of economic and racial segregation that we've seen, or are you worried that they're going to be exacerbated by this?
Yeah, there's a good possibility for that. I think the city of Fresno made a really great step to invest in a report that would show how do we reverse some of those policies that got us to where we are today, and that was in the Here to Stay report. The Here to Stay report was specifically for downtown Fresno, and the Thrive-Ins group spent, over the pandemic, many days, many hours having conversations on the ground with folks about the housing crisis and what are the possibilities of what life could look like when you're invested into. And they came up with a set of 46 policies that could help revitalize and help deeply invest into downtown Fresno. And we're eager to continue to work with the city of Fresno to continue to implement some of those policies. I think there's still a lack of opportunity taken to work together with some of the community advocates, with leaders on the ground who are a part of that community and a part of the general community who maybe have been there for generations. The 50 million coming into downtown Fresno is wonderful. We need an investment like this for our infrastructure. And I think where some of the pieces are missing is there isn't enough deep investment for communities and thinking about what their life is going to be like there. Are they going to have a right to return when construction starts? And so, Elliott, I'd love the opportunity for us to sit with you around how can this money really become something great for downtown Fresno and the city of Fresno?
Well, actually, Elliott, I mean, it raises, for me, it makes me think that if there is going to be a pull of private sector development into the downtown, presumably one of those enabling factors that you talked about is prices and rents that support that. So is it possible to sort of draw in that development that I think a lot of us would agree is necessary without pricing out the folks who already live there?
Well, I think there's room for a mix, and we definitely want to make sure that over the long term, the affordability, the accessibility of our downtown is maintained. And so that's bedrock. Also, though, we have to see, well, a lot of the housing that's been built has been that the most affordable housing that you would have in the spectrum, in that mix. And so it has proven more difficult to develop market rate housing. It would be my take. And we just need to make sure that there is the range. I would also add that I see power and value in the change process and in the opportunity to create opportunity for more of our community to be part of the development process. And development's been a very, old money, white guys game for a long time. And I think we have an opportunity to change that, to develop community structures that get us the development that we want and really leave a lot more people with the capabilities of doing development in their own neighborhoods or in other parts of our community. And I'm not just dreaming, because we have a small business owner on Fulton whose mom was an Estetica owner and moved in there in 1997 and managed to buy the building from the legacy owners in 2015. And he's now got his small business, and he came back to town to open it. And we had a wet winter, so he went upstairs to fix the leak in the roof, had to cut some holes to get up there. He found a wide open floor upstairs from his shop. And so we have now a family that through different, lots of work, right, and struggle to get to the place where they are, but want to be part of creating housing in our downtown. And this is an opportunity for a wealth creation story where they're climbing that ladder of opportunity. I would love to figure out how we make that the norm, or add that to part of to what happens, right? Obviously, we need big projects that house a lot of people, but we also need smaller projects that encourage more people to be part of the development process, would be my take.
Great. So I want to make sure we have enough time for questions from the audience. So I think my colleague Evelyn is over there with a microphone. Hopefully we'll have enough time for 3, 4, maybe more questions. If anyone has a question, just raise your hand. Okay. And if you could if you want to direct it to one of the panelists, or just keep it open, that's fine. And just keep it quick if you can.
Hi, my name is Smiley with the Community Alliance newspaper. And my question maybe to Elliott or to all of you, how has the Bitwise, debacle affected the outlook of downtown Fresno and maybe the affordability for housing?
Well, I'll tell you this. So obviously it's a big speed bump, but the direction that we're going as downtown is not changed. Downtown is still the place. Downtowns are still the places where innovation happens in regions, where people come together and share ideas, and new things happen. So Bitwise has been in downtown Fresno and other downtowns for that reason, not the other way around, right? So I'm long-term optimistic. In terms of the demand for housing, we're here to talk about housing. I would tell you that I had the good fortune a month ago to be on a demo call with a company that has access to like tracking data of smartphones. And I had them geofence the Fulton Street area. And so I can tell you based on that, that the demographics of folks who are visiting Fulton, that's the data I had, are almost an exact mirror of our region's demographics. The modal ethnicity is 56% Hispanic. The household size is 3.4. The median age is 32.4. You get the idea, right? The bachelor's attainment is 17.9%. I mean, this is a picture of our region, people who are coming and saying they want more of. So by and large, the numbers are very much in our favor.
Hi, you guys. Thank you all. One tool that is going to surface soon, we understand, is called a fiscal impact analysis tool that the City Council funded. And I hope Fresnoland will cover it in depth, and that the Fresno Bee will look at it, because it helps us understand what it costs to build on the fringes anymore. I mean, really costs, what it costs the rest of us. I live in the Tower District. Like every time they build a house out at like Nosebleed Land, it's, very painful for us. So it's a way of holding decision makers accountable for development decisions. And that's never really been the case for years and years and decades. The question has been, oh, so-and-so wants to build, of course, how can it be a bad idea? And the public investment is massive, and it gets more massive as you get toward the fringes because of the tax sharing agreement with the county, which is so disadvantageous to the city. So my hope is that those of you who are in a position to draw attention to this tool will start asking electeds, are you using this? Do you see what the data says? And based on what the data says, are you kidding me? You're going to approve this? So just saying.
We are covering it.
Hi, I'm Leslie with Leadership Council. There's a word that I don't think no one said, but rent control is also very important to the city of Fresno, because I'm so happy we're having the downtown conversation. I love downtown. I too live in the Tower. But the big part about Fresno is it has been affordable for a lot of farm workers and like people of color and Black communities who have historically literally been removed, and then they push them out to the outskirts. So when Fresno has a housing problem, the rest of the entire region, like, that if we get the cough, they have the flu or whatever, like that's a real reality in Fresno. So, and then I wanted to push back on something, because I heard something about local control, but local control got us here. So my question to the panel is, what are real policies that we can push forward to make sure that everybody has a house in Fresno, and that they can walk to their school, and that their air isn't disgusting, and that they have access to opportunity? Because 10,000 applications, I think that's terrifying. I think the long story short is what are we actually gonna do about affordable housing? Including every region, not just downtown. People deserve to live everywhere in Fresno. So my question is, realistically, rent control is obviously something we need, but how do we ensure people can stay where they're at? And how do we make sure that our local officials are held accountable for this mess they got us in?
So I'll just speak in terms of local control, because I know I had brought up that term, but I also think it's really important for community members, and I'm glad that Fresno is producing housing, and it's looking at, some of the lower income households to be able to afford housing. But I think one of the things that we forget in terms of local control, obviously this is a fix it's going to require local, state, and federal working together, right? Especially in some of the financing, streamlining processes. But I think also some of the local policy documents that you all have and that we all have as elected officials is we have our general plan process. And it's really important to be able to look at that and say, what does that general plan process look like? Where does it develop housing? Where is it looking at the concentrations of where that housing is going to be placed? But then we also have the housing element. And I know that's more of a state mandated plan, but those housing elements also provide the opportunity for conversations that were mentioned to be able to have real discussions with your elected officials in terms of where is this planned housing going to be, and is this housing element really does it really reflect the needs of our communities? And if it does not reflect the needs of a community, then what policy changes need to be made? What land use decisions need to be change to allow for housing to develop where it's needed, and people that need the housing at all income levels can afford the housing that's being produced.
Danielle, did you want to talk about rent control? Because I know that's in a lot of political circles in Fresno, that's a 4-letter word still.
Absolutely. I have 2 observations on the rent control debate in Fresno, which has been a very lively one recently, as we talked about earlier this week. My first observation is that what has been really interesting is how much it has been a debate that has been relegated to the fringe as much as possible. And for a policy that continues to show up in the Here to Stay report, in different policy experts' analysis of how to solve affordability, and to not get a very serious hearing internally has been an interesting observation. And I know that we did some reporting in partnership with the Fresno Bee on the number of landlords that are currently sitting city council members. The mayor is also a landlord, and does that have to do with their inability to hear it? We don't know. The other observation I'll have is for a long time, rent control has been seen by economists as very stifling to building housing supply. I'm looking at you because I feel like somehow Elliott is always someone that knows what the economists are talking about. Possibly more than I do.
I have the heart of an economist, but that's only funny because economists don't have hearts.
True enough. And there has been, the nerd in me coming out a little bit, there has been some good data recently looking at whether that premise is true. Does rent control actually stifle building housing supply? And the results have been really mixed. And it really, really, really depends on how you implement it. And the details matter deeply. And my hope is that given the consistency of how this issue comes up in the community, that we can have a more serious debate about how you might implement something like that.
I think there's been a lot of confusion around what rent control is in the city of Fresno, and there hasn't been a strong understanding or alignment on the definition alone. That's definitely issue number one. Some of the points he brought up, Danielle, spot on, absolutely. We have city council members who are building a profit off of housing, right? I think rent control is a small piece in how we start to get to a point where we do see housing as a human right. Rent control doesn't solve the problem of folks who are unhoused now and have been or have been chronically unhoused, but it's a part of the solution. So the fact that there's so much debate and so much push against people coming to the dais and saying, I am paying way more than half of my rent to my housing. I cannot afford my children's stuff for school, and they're crying, and still nothing is being done when this is only a small piece of how we start to address our housing crisis. It's a real issue.
Okay. Maybe you have time for one more question?
Hi, my name is James Rellis, he, him. I had two things I was thinking about as the discussion was going. One was the financing that was talked about and the lack of financing here and available out to rent control, to those things. And how do we get developers to step up and actually build homes that are affordable? Where do we find those builders? How do we get them to build these homes for the cost that it needs to be to house a person, to give them a home? Because we are only, most of us, I think most of us in this room are maybe a paycheck to maybe a month or two away from being unhoused themselves. So what would happen if we had a place where we all had a safe place to wash? And the other part to that is we had the former hospital, and the funding went belly up on that. The hospital that was supposed to be affordable housing, whatever ended up happening with that. These are the problems that we're seeing, and it's incredibly frustrating as a millennial, as a father of a 5-year-old. I will never probably own a home. Just point blank, I ain't gonna ever own a home. And it's really, really sad. And I don't understand why we can't come up with solutions when other countries, other cities, other regions have done that. So I'm sorry, it's just from my heart, and
Sure.
I don't know if I have a question really, just what do we do? And what, I guess if I am going to make it a question, what do I tell my daughter?
So there's a lot of frustration there, obviously. I mean, no. As there, understandably.
I just first wanted to
Fox.
acknowledge, like, your very real story that you just shared with us and the vulnerability that you shared with us. I just want you to know that I see you, we hear you, and there's many people in this room that see you and hear you too, because there is a dream out there. And you're right, other countries are investing into public housing where people have lifetime leases that they get to pass on to their children. And think about that for a second. You go into your home that is environmentally safe. You have everything you need to live a healthy, clean life, however you choose to live. And you are not worried about your rent being increased because it's based off of what you're making. And there's no threat of a 3-day performer quit. There's no threat of a 60-day eviction notice. You have a lifetime lease that you get to pass on to your children. How much time, how much space in your mind and stress do you carry thinking about where your children are going to live after you are gone? How many of you worry about that? You worry about your little sisters, your little brothers, your little cousins. How are my sisters who are currently graduating college that are renters, how are they going to get to a place and find a well enough job that they get to live in a city where they get to be happy with their friends and they get to afford it, get to have that dream of buying a home? That's something that I truly worry about.
So, do you want to add something?
I do. I want to add to that. So thank you so much, Alex, for that. And thank you so much for your question as well. So I want to share, because I want to share one just to the note in terms of some of the senator's legislation. And then I do want to talk about some of the funding that the state has. So the senator did author SB 225, which is a community anti-displacement and preservation program, which is called CAP. But this creates, to the point here, that framework for technical assistance programs with the Housing Community Development Department to assist with the acquisition of and rehabilitation of market rate units to conversion for deed restriction. Affordable rental units with deed restrictions. And to the point that why is this important? Because it's important to be able to preserve those affordable units for future generations, right? And to be able to ensure that our future generations will have a place to call home.
So actually, sorry, I think we're almost at time, but that is a good way to segue, where I think conversations about housing can feel really bleak sometimes and really frustrating. But I'm wondering if we could just end it with a question I have, which is what's one thing that makes you feel hopeful about the future of affordability in Fresno? Maybe we could just go down the line if that's all right.
Can I go last?
You want to go last? Okay, sure.
Oh, do I want to go first? So what makes me feel hopeful? I think what makes me feel hopeful is that we're having a conversation, about housing, and that we understand the importance of the relationship between housing and a good quality of life. And I think that's really important because the conversations before weren't really at the table. And I think we're having a conversation, not just at the local level, but this is happening at the federal level, at the state level, and also at the federal level. And I think we've recognized that housing doesn't come with one solution. There's a multitude of solutions, but it requires all the partners working together. It's not one entity that's going to solve the housing crisis, but it's going to take all of us working together. And that makes me hopeful.
Yeah, I'm going to ditto that part. I think it is going to take all of us working together to really give people the dignity that they deserve. What gives me hope are young people, young people of color, our indigenous communities that are sharing the way they think about housing and the relationship that they have to the land and what learnings we can take from them. What gives me hope is a lot of people in this room who are on the ground, who are renters themselves and having conversations with folks. What gives me hope is when I get to an apartment complex and people already are in relationship and are building together and are figuring out ways to support each other. How communities are thinking about pushing what mutual aid looks like. It's not dependent on a nonprofit organization giving them handouts. It's them working with each other. And so, yeah, there's a lot that's giving me hope right now.
It's kind of similar that housing is kind of a hot topic in any format of government or nonprofits. There's a lot of conversation around this issue that's been around for a long time. I do want to leave you with a couple of things, because when we talk about deed restrictions, in California means typically 55 years, which is not long enough. We really need to think about how do we make that more permanent housing, the restrictions to be without an ending timeline. That's how public housing works, is the restrictions are essentially for the life of the building and it runs with the land for in perpetuity, right? I think that's where we need to go, because we're coming to the point where we're going to start losing affordable, some of these affordable units that we work really hard to get into market are going to be potentially converted to market. So as fast as we're building them, we're going to get to the point where we're going to lose them just as fast. And so that's kind of low-hanging fruit. And the last thing I want to say is the solutions for affordable housing look different in each community, each part of the region. But I do want to refer you to what I think is a powerful tool created by Housing California, which I'm a board member of, in partnership with California Housing Partnership. It's called roadmaphome2030.org, and it provides a variety of potential solutions that don't fit every community, but there's some that I think cover every parts of the state, and doesn't just identify solutions, but also identifies potential funding sources for them as well.
Great.
Thank you.
How's it going? Well, I'm optimistic because I think that kind of, as has been said, I think COVID and the price shock, the crazy things that have happened have sort of woken us up, and so housing really is a laser focus point in a way that it hasn't been before, at least in our region. So that gives me hope. And I'm also hopeful that we haven't really talked about kind of the holistic concept of affordability, but mentioning the car that broke down, and like that we start to see value in our existing city and see infill and more different kinds of housing that get built in our city to accommodate people in lots of different ways.
I would just add, during the pandemic, a lot of new things were tried in Fresno that we've never seen before. The city started a rental assistance program. The county then started a rental assistance program. They launched an eviction protection program. There was renewed urgency to think about how we build a lot faster and eliminate even more barriers. And I think I was really pleasantly surprised to see that in the face of urgency, people can move mountains. And I think that that sense of possibility is really exciting to see.
All right. Danielle, Elliott, Michael, Alex, Anna, thank you so much.
Thanks to you all. Thank you for the conversation. Thank you for the heartfelt questions and the comments. And I hope we can have this conversation often. And by the time your daughter is 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years old, you're able to give her some more hopeful thoughts about the future, right? A lot of the conversation in this room tonight before, and I'm sure after, please join us and keep talking afterwards, is so important. The conversation lives on in the journalism that we do about it, right? That's why Fresnoland is so important. I want to thank Donnie and her team for all their work to put this together tonight, to bring a lot of you here. Thank you. And thanks to Ben for hosting and for the events team at CalMatters for helping to put this together as well. The journalism that is done by Fresnoland, by CalMatters, by the other folks in this room and throughout the Valley who are covering these issues is so important. Very much of it is dependent on you. If you're able to support it, become a member of Fresnoland and or CalMatters, and would be great. And if we can do this, we both raise the money, we work together, we try to do this at the state level and at the local level. You can also support that journalism by just getting in there and being part of the conversation. Send in your thoughts, comment on things, share the work that you see. If you see a story that's important people should be talking about, share it, send it to somebody else, because the conversation takes all of us. I really appreciate what all of you are doing here and what the conversation that we're having statewide about this. And this is the beginning of that conversation, not the end. So thank you all for coming tonight. And thanks to everybody who joined us online. Good night.